Hello again, CSCI-150 students. This is a recording for Introduction to Python. We're going to write our first complete program in Python. As was mentioned in the previous recording, please make sure you do the Zybook readings and exercises assigned prior to watching this video. One of the things you notice that I have Raptor showing on my screen. One of the things we have to keep in mind in this course going forward is that anytime you write a program, there are two aspects that you are dealing with. There's the logic of the program, and there is the syntax of the program, which becomes very important in a text-based language like Python. In order for us not to have to deal with both simultaneously, most of the time the process is given a problem, you figure out an algorithm, and then you take that algorithm, translate it to your programming language, in this case Python, and then you could expand that later on to do additional tasks. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing here, at least in the first few Python labs. We're going to start out with a Raptor program that solves the problem and then focus on translating that into text-based Python. So I'm going to launch my Python editor, which is right here. It's got the same views that we discussed last time, the program over here, and the editor, the shell at the bottom, and then the variables at the very on the right. So our program basically takes three variables, exam1 score, exam2 score, exam3 score, computes the average of the three exams, and then displays the average of the three exam scores in a meaningful message that includes all three exam scores plus the average. It's pretty straightforward program. Now we're going to write the equivalent to that in Raptor, and I'm going to try, in Thani, and I'm going to try to use the same variable name. So the equivalent of any get statement in Raptor would be an input statement in Python. So I'm going to say exam1, the name of my variable, is equal to input. That would be the equivalent of get. And then you provide a message, in this case enter exam1 score, or just to make it equivalent to the one that you're seeing, I'm just going to say enter exam1. Okay. And then I'll do the same thing for exam2 and exam3. But before we go forward, every time you write a new line of code, you might want to run your program just to make sure that that line did not introduce any new errors. So I'm going to try to run. By the way, I wasn't clear on that last time. This is the play button is what you use to run your program. But first, as we noticed last time, we needed to save the program. So I'm going to say File, Save As, and then it'll ask you where do you want to save. You go to wherever you want to save the program. I'm going to save it in the same folder that I'm using for this recording, which in your case would not be valid. You have to use whatever structure your class instructor has asked you to set up on your machines or on your accounts. Let's see over here. Okay, and I'm gonna name it Intro to Python average exam score. So the same thing as the Raptor program, but with a .py extension, because this is a Python program. Okay, and I'm going to attempt to run my program, and it says enter exam1. I enter the value 90, and now I've got 90 as my score. So this seems to be working fine. I'm going to now do the same thing for exams 2 and 3. This is exam 2, exam 3, 2 and 3. Okay, run the same thing. Exam 1, let's say 50, exam 2 70, and exam 3 80. Okay, and then all three values are set up properly over here. Now one thing you notice right away is that the value for the exams are enclosed between single quotes. That's because unless you tell Thani that this is a number, it's going to interpret whatever value you enter as a string. So if I try now to create an average variable that is equal to exam1 plus exam2 plus exam3 divided by 3, it's not going to like it. Save and run. Okay, let's try again. 50, 70, and 80, it's going to tell me, well, you cannot really average strings. That doesn't make sense. You cannot divide a string by a number. So basically, it's telling me that exam 1, 2, and 3 are all strings, not numbers. So you need to tell Thani, I want this as a number. And there are two different types of numbers in Thani. There are the integers that are whole numbers, and there are the decimal numbers, or what we call floating point numbers. This will be the ones that have decimal places in them. So for simplicity, I'm just going to assume the grades are all going to be integers, and I'm going to say whatever number the user enters in the input statement, take that number and convert it into an int or an integer. So I'm going to do the same thing over here and the same thing over here. So now the three numbers that I've entered will be interpreted as integer numbers. I'm going to save and run again. Okay, so let's do 50, 70, and 80. Okay, so now notice all the numbers are now numbers. They're not strings anymore. They don't have the single quotes. And then I've got the average computed, which is correct. Of course, you need to know the correct answer. So the average of 50, 70, and 80 is actually 66.67, but this goes into many, many decimal places by default. Okay, so everything seems to be doing fine so far. We've translated 1, 2, 3, and 4 statements so far. The next thing we need to do is the print statement. But before we do that, I would just want to highlight a few concepts. In Python, you could use either double quotes or single quotes for your strings. So these two versions are equivalent. Doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. You cannot mix and match, number one. And usually, our programs have comments in them describing to the reader what's happening. Any line that starts with a pound is considered to be a comment. So in this case, input exam scores. So here I'm describing to the user what's happening. And now compute average. Okay. And then finally display output. Okay, and that's where we will write the display statement. So now for now I'm just going to say print average, and then later on we'll worry about the format. So I'm going to run my program again. So notice that first statement, input exam scores, it really didn't affect the program at all. The program directly went into the first statement. So this is 50, 70, and 80, and then it's going to display the average for me. Now what remains is, before I talk about that, if you want your numbers to be floating point numbers that allow for decimal places, then you use float instead of integer. But again, for simplicity, for now, we're just going to do integer. What I want now is to display this statement. The average of, so instead of saying just average, I want to display this statement. The average score of, okay, so I'm just going to write it exactly as it is written in Raptor, plus, comma, plus exam2, plus, and, plus, exam3, plus, is average. Okay, you can split that on 2 lines. Okay, so this is exactly what we had in the Raptor program. Let's see how Python is gonna view that. Okay, so I need 50, 70, and 80. And Python is gonna complain. It tells me when you wanna print something, you cannot give me numbers and strings using the plus operator. The plus operator only works if you give it 2 numbers, it's gonna add them mathematically. And if you give it 2 strings, it's going to append them to each other. Okay, but if you give it a string and a number, it can't deal with that. So what you have to tell Fani now is that, okay, interpret this variable that has the value as a string. str stands for the string. So I don't want the variable integer, exam1, I want that to be cast or changed into a string. So this way, when I tell it the average score of and then plus a string, it's going to append the two together. So string exam3 and then string average. Okay, let's try that one more time. 50, 60, and 80. Okay, I entered different numbers now. It displayed something for me, but the message is not formatted properly. That is because, as you recall from Raptor, if you want a space to appear, you have to include that in your string. So I need a space over here, and then I also would need a space after the comma, and then the rest I already included spaces for them. So let's run it one more time. I believe we were using 50, 70, and 80. Okay, so this is the message that we would like to see. Another option for us, if you hate doing strings and pluses, you could replace them with commas. So over here, just put commas before and after. Now this will fix the problem. The only issue is that it forces us to introduce spaces into our output, whether we want the space in the output or not. So as you will see now, this is going to be just fine, but it's going to add additional spaces. Anytime there is a comma, a space is included before and after the value. So 50, 70, and 80. Okay, this is the second statement. And notice how additional commas are, additional spaces are there. Of course, you can get rid of the original spaces, and then this way it'll be just fine. But yet again, you don't have full control over where the commas, where the spaces are. So if you want a space in some place but not another place, then you're out of luck with the commas. As you can see over here, it's going to force a space before and after the outputs come over. Your book talks about formatting strings in section 3.7. And what it does, the way it does it is by using the .format function along with curly braces. So I have that written over here. I'm just going to copy paste it into the program just to save time. So that would be the print statement over here. And again, we no longer need this, so I'm going to expand this so that you get a better view. Okay, so the way this works is that you write your output just as a single statement, and every time there's a variable, you put a placeholder for that variable using curly braces. So the average score of curly brace, that's going to be replaced, the first one, by the first variable in the message. After the dot format, I mean. The second curly brace will be replaced by the value of exam2, third one, exam3, and the fourth one with the average over here. So you put the message that you want to display, followed by dot format, a bunch of variables, and then those variables will replace the curly braces in the same order that they appear in. So again, run the program again, 50, 70, and 80, and it's going to give us the same message as before. You can actually put values over here, 0, 1, 2, 3. This, if you don't want the variables over here to be drawn in the same output they appear over here. Like for example, let's say if you want to display the same variable multiple times, if I say 0, that means this is the first variable over here. 1 would be the second variable, 2, the third, and then 3 would be the fourth. So let's say I want to display the same variable twice. I can then use 0 and 0 without number orderings or without numbers in here. I won't be able to do that. So now 50, 70, and 80. Now 50 and 50 are going to appear twice because I've put those numbers in here. But that's not what I want. I actually want 0, 0, and 1. You could also tell Thani or Python if there's a specific way your number needs or your variable needs to be interpreted. By default, it would be a string. But if you want to interpret it as a number, you could follow that with either a D for decimal if it's an integer. So this is decimal, 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 or F if it's a floating point number or a number that includes decimal places. It's unfortunate that they use D for integers. It's a bit confusing. I can understand that. So now I said take the first variable, interpret it as a number, just an integer. Same thing for the second one, third one, but the last one interpreted as a floating point number. So 50, 70, and 80. So now it's going to do that. And really the only time you'd need to do that is with floating point numbers, especially if you want to format your floating point number. By default, you get 6 decimal places. But you could tell it, I want only 2 decimal places or 2 values after the decimal point. 0.2f means a floating point number that has decimal places, but round to 2 digits after the decimal place. 50, 70, and 80. So now the values display properly. And again, if you don't want to use positions, you want to go with the default, you could just omit these, just like we talked about before. So the only time you'd use variable positions is if you want to display them not in the same order that they appear in the format function parameter list, or if you want to repeat the same variable multiple times. 50, 70, and 80. So that should be all for this recording. I look forward to recording the next Python video for you pretty soon. So stay tuned and thank you much.